it couldn't have a barbecue.
This meeting come to order, please. Can we have a roll call?
Vice Mayor Villanueva.
Here.
Councilmember Longabaugh. Here. Councilmember Alton.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson. And Mayor Truitt is absent.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we have item number 1.
Thank you. Item number 1 is a training on the Arizona open meeting law presented by City Attorney Michael Daly.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening is one of the trainings that this council is committed to. One of the many trainings, actually, this council will have undertaken and is committed to with regards to the Arizona open meeting law. As we all know, the council adopted the findings, and one of the measures that we're moving forward with is to have training. This is the training that we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing on a quarterly basis, and we'll go through in that regards this evening. This evening, I'm going to touch upon the previous training. What is the training schedule that we're going to look forward to? Tonight is really going to be Arizona open meeting law basics. One of the things that the Attorney General's office wanted us to do is start at page 1, which I know will be exciting because of all of the training that you've had in the last 6 months, but we're going to step back, make sure we do some of this training, then move forward. What we're talking about tonight is really what is the agenda, why do we have an agenda, what is the meeting, the purpose of the meeting, keeping minutes, and then finally a wrap-up, and where do we go from here. The purpose of the open meeting law, very clear. It's to ensure that the public has the opportunity to observe what the government is doing, how the government is doing it, and why the government is doing it. I think it can be broken down in terms of kind of the simple phrase of notice, observation, and recordation. So if there's things to try and keep in mind with regard to that, it's notice, observation, and recordation. As we've identified, it applies to not only you as the council, but it applies to advisory boards and subcommittees, the Planning and Zoning, the Board of Adjustment, Revitalization Committee, and also the Ad Hoc Committee. So, for example, the Ad Hoc Committee with regards to foreclosure, they were subject to the open meeting law, so we would have to comply with that as well. One thing so that the council understands in terms of educating these boards, the city attorney's office, we have provided education to all of these boards with regards to the open meeting law, also with conflict of interest, and it's our goal to do it on an annual basis or when there's a significant turnover in terms of the membership. And we found in terms of a practice that generally addresses all of the issues with regards to the open meeting law. As a reminder, the method of communication in terms of how can we have a problem, let's say, with the open meeting law, can happen either during a phone call when one member calls another member, through email when a member emails another member, or emails all of the other members. Also with letters, when you send out a letter, it can happen. And then also if you use staff to transmit information. Council needs to understand that you can't use a staff member to overcome the open meeting law. An example of that would be to go to a staff member, say, I want you to go to these 3 council members and find out what it is they are doing, and then come back and report to me. You can't do that. And then finally, the hub and spoke. That's the big issue that the Attorney General is concerned about. The hub and spoke is, again, it's the wheel concept, that you have somebody in the middle, everybody works through that person in the middle, and by doing so, that there's the open meeting violation. The example being, let's say that I am the hub, all of you are spokes, you all come to me, and I take the information from Councilmember Johnson, then I go to Councilmember Alton, and I say, well, Councilmember Alton, this is what Councilmember Johnson said. And really what it becomes is negotiating or actually conducting a meeting in private as opposed to in the public, is what and that's what we really want to do in the open meeting, is have our business out in the public. So again, the discussion topics, notice, observation, and recordation. Basically, it's the agenda, it's the meeting, and the minutes. The agenda is basic notice of what it is that we're going to do. It identifies to the public, this is the business that we plan to conduct that evening. The law requires that there must be a 24-hour notice. As a matter of practice, the city has a 5-day notice. our agendas are typically out the Friday before, so we comply with that. We clearly comply with that. The only exception to the 24-hour notice is a 72-hour notice, which has to do with if there is a perceived violation, we can ratify that, and I'll talk about it a little later. We can ratify that decision. However, at that point in time, we'd have to do a 72-hour notice instead of the 24-hour notice. Also, another exception is the fact if there is an emergency, and it must be a true emergency, the fact that I may have been on vacation, that may not be an emergency. Items described in the agenda must contain such information as is reasonably necessary to inform the public of the matters to be discussed or decided. What that really means is that if somebody who has not been at City Hall picks up an agenda and reads it and says, item number 1, consideration and action on such and such contract, they are able to understand what is going to be discussed that night. We just can't put in there consideration and action on construction contract. We'd have to identify the parties, and we do that as well. One of the challenges with the agenda, and it's one of the challenges that we face during a regular meeting, is that we cannot discuss information that has not been noticed on the agenda. And one of the big challenges that we have as a public body, and I put it up there, and it's something to consider, is the call to the public. We have a call to the public. We're not required to have a call to the public. A lot of elected officials don't know that. And one of the things, we don't have to have that, call to the public. However, we choose to do that to allow the public to come and speak before this council. The challenge is once somebody comes and says something, we cannot discuss it. Why? Because we haven't given 24-hour notice for that. So we can't discuss any action. All we can do is respond to criticism. Now, if you think about that, now that becomes a really fine line. We can't discuss it to act on it, but we need to respond to criticism. Very fine line. A practice that I would recommend is what I have down there is ultimately ask staff to review the matter and get in touch with the individual, or ask the item to be placed on a future agenda. We now notice the future agenda items at the end of every one of our agendas, and that's a good opportunity after somebody may have come up. In fact, I think we've done that. Councilmember Williams, an individual came up last meeting. I think it was you up here, but an individual came up and spoke about the skateboarding park. Or an area to skateboard and BMX, and then it was directing staff to do that. We could not talk about that because we hadn't noticed it. That would have been a violation. But I say that not only for you, but also for the public that's listening. One of the challenges they have is they come before you and they say, this is a concern that I have, and then I think just based upon their appearances, they appear very frustrated that you have not responded. Well, by the law, you cannot do that, but you can direct staff to do that. In terms of an executive session has to be noticed as well. It also must be properly noticed. Properly noticed, again, it has to be 24 hours in advance. There's also specific limitations and why we can go in to executive session. We are going to talk about executive sessions in general at a later training in more specificity. The one thing I want to bring to your attention, though, with regards to executive session and notice, because, again, tonight we're talking notice, observation, recordation. As you can see, the repetitiveness I'm trying to get in your minds here is that in terms of exactly, I tried an acronym and knock doesn't work, or I don't even think that because I had to put the K in front of it and it just doesn't work. But in terms of notice of an executive session, one exception is with employment matters. When you notice an executive session, not only do you have to do it 24 hours in advance, you have to notify the individual you want to discuss in writing as well. And so you have to give them, and the clerk's office and the attorney's office, we generally handle that, but I want you to be aware of that.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So as we go through the agenda, if we have a question, are we allowed to request going, I don't know if I just spaced out, but can we request going into executive session on an item currently on the agenda?
That's an excellent question. We are allowed to go into one of the exceptions that allows you to go into an executive session. First and foremost, the council must vote. There must be a motion, a second of a motion, and vote to go into an executive session. The primary reason to go into an executive session is to get legal advice from your legal counsel. So the way we notice our agendas, as is the practice across the state, is that we notice a general executive session notice. If you'll look at the bottom of tonight's agenda, you'll see that we can go into an executive session on any item for which you want legal advice. So if there is an item that comes up tonight, you would like to get some legal advice from me, you would ask, can we go into an executive session about, and then we could go do that.
Excuse me, but on a personnel matter, we wouldn't be able to do that, to go into executive session to discuss that individual because they haven't been notified?
Correct.
Okay.
An employment matter, also in terms of specific matters, if there is a contract matter, let's say, that you'd like to discuss, it's not on the agenda, we could not go into an executive session to do that. We'd have to notice it separately as well. But what we do is we have an umbrella notice that goes over the entire agenda, so that in the event that you need legal counsel, we can go into an executive session.
Okay.
Observation, what is a meeting? Well, this is a meeting. All meetings of any public body shall be public meetings, and all persons so desiring shall be permitted to attend and listen to the deliberations and proceedings. So what is this meeting where we all get together? It's the gathering in person or through technological devices of a quorum of members of a public body at which they discuss, propose, or take legal action, including any deliberations by a quorum with respect to such action. So when you look at this is an open meeting because we're in public, but you can read that definition. You can see that, hey, 4 of us may be somewhere, and we start talking about something that may be a legal action that we will take at a later date, and that's the kind of stuff you want to avoid. You want to avoid those scenarios where there's a quorum of you, that would be 4, the magic number is 4, where you start to discuss, propose, or take legal action. Keep in mind that there are all kinds of events that you all attend. Spring training, tennis. We do a lot of great things here. There's a lot of things to attend. We notice those publicly that there may be a quorum in attendance, which is one way that we can identify to the public that you may be there, and that satisfies the requirement to ensure that the public has noticed that the council will be there. So we provide a notice of quorum activities in addition to an agenda. So we almost have 2 documents. In fact, if you all knew how much people know about your personal lives, you'd probably be shocked, because I can go outside and I can look at a notice of quorum and I can look at an agenda and I can tell where you're all going to be all week. So, and I have your cell phone number, so I can call you at any time. Again, the meeting is the discussion of legal action, proposing of legal action, deliberation of legal action, and taking legal action. Those are the primary concerns. You don't want to do that unless you're in an open meeting. What is this legal action? It's a collective decision, a commitment, a promise that's made by a public body pursuant to the Constitution, the public body's charter. We don't have a charter. Bylaws or specified scope of appointment in the laws of this state. Basically anything that has to do with our ordinances or how we operate is, in terms of municipality, decisions with regard to that, that is legal action. And then finally, recordation. Again, we're talking about notice, observation, and recordation. Recordation is basically the record of what we do in public. And it's similar to the agenda to the extent that the law is trying to protect the individual that's not here. The law wants an individual to be able to pick up a piece of paper, read and say, this is what they are going to consider on Thursday night, get that piece of paper 3 days later, that's the minutes, and say, okay, and this is what they did. So all the business that you've conducted, somebody can read without having to be here. In general, minutes, they can be taken in writing or they can be recorded. Yes?
Go, I believe that was the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I might have got ahead of you just a little bit. It said the executive session minutes are confidential, but doesn't it say that anybody that is reasonably expected to be in an executive session that wasn't there has the right to review those?
Minutes.
In terms of
Minutes.
reviewing the minutes as a standard, it's you need to be present to be there. However, in the event, and there's specific circumstances, in the event that a decision that you would need to make with regards to that subject matter, and you need to be informed of that, then you could possibly be allowed to look at those minutes. Additionally, the remainder of the council can vote to allow you to see those as well.
Right, because I was told if it's reasonably expected that you are going to vote on something but you weren't present, but it's reasonably expected that you could be in there, which would be any council member, or city attorney, etc. But they told me that you are able to review them.
I think the link, I don't think it's reasonably, I think it's necessary, if the party is necessary.
Necessary or something.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. They may be taken in writing, or they may be recorded. In terms of our minutes are actually taken in a transcript or a written form. We also have the Granicus program now, which actually takes not only the minutes, but it records this video and audio, and you're able to get online and click our agenda and go to the discussion of that topic. In fact, I would offer to you that with Granicus and the steps that we're currently taking with regards to our minutes, we are above and beyond what our other cities are doing. On that note, I would share with you that the Attorney General was, the office, the Omelette team was impressed with Granicus and what we were doing, and they even inferred that we could be possibly deemed as a model city as we move forward in getting the training. So I endeavor you all to move forward with this.
When do we get the award?
Yeah, right.
Well, we'll work on that. We'll work on that with you. The minutes, they must be available for public inspection within 3 working days. We have no problem with that again. Also, executive session minutes are confidential. Councilmember Johnson is right. If you're a necessary party, you can have access to them. However, it becomes a challenge as to when is somebody necessary. For the most part, as elected officials, you are necessary because you will be making decisions. In terms of the minutes, and I go through this, and the reason being is because one thing that at times elected officials may forget is you have one item on the agenda every meeting, and that is the approval of the minutes. And then keep in mind, this is the record of your business. And it's, you know, I could possibly call it your statue in the park, because you'll always be in there, and that statement that you made in that meeting, it will always be there for the history of the city. That's what Councilmember Williams said. He said X. So review those minutes. Make sure that they reflect what you said. You want to make sure that they're accurate.
Mr. Bailey,
Yes.
is it not true that we don't necessarily have to take minutes? Or what? Verbatim?
We are not required to take verbatim minutes.
Right.
Correct. But we have to take minutes sufficient, and I was going to go through that,
Okay.
that sufficient to notify the public of the business that we're conducting. In terms of the content, the date, time, and the place of the meeting, who is in attendance. Sherry every time asks who's in attendance. A general description of what occurred, names of persons making statements or presenting. So I get to go in the minutes tonight because I'm presenting to you, and I will check them and make sure that everything I've said is accurate. Also, exactly.
Be more than you want to be.
Well, you know, I yes, probably. Sufficient information to permit the public to investigate the background of the item. And that's really the integral part of about that, is we want to make sure the public knows the business that we're doing. Also, if there was an emergency in the case of a meeting having to be held without the 24-hour notice, we would have to have a full description of the nature of the emergency. At this point in time, I'm unaware of any situation in Arizona in the past 3 to 4 years where there has been an emergency that would require a shortened notice. And then finally, if a prior act was ratified, and that has to go with ratifying acts that may be deemed in violation of the open meeting law. In terms of this evening, notice, observation, recordation. What happens if we don't have appropriate notice, if we don't allow the public to observe, and we don't properly record? Well, there's violations and there's sanctions. The first and foremost is that any action that's taken in violation of any provision is void unless subsequently ratified. So, for example, if it's a contract, there's an open meeting law violation alleged with the contract, that contract is null and void. No contract exists. There's also a civil penalty. The penalty is personal. It's personal to all of you individually. The city can't pay for it. There's no action that you can take to have the city pay for it. And then finally, there's the potential for removal of office. One item of note is that, and I mentioned this previously, and that is an action can be ratified within 30 days of discovering the violation. So in the event that there is a violation or there's perceived to be a violation, and part of this is the legislature understood that mistakes happen. Nobody's perfect. I mean, we need to understand that. We're going through this training here and understand that nobody is perfect, and the law recognizes that as well, and that gives us the opportunity to ratify some of our actions. What we would have to do in terms of ratifying it, it's a 72-hour notice in advance as opposed to the 24-hour notice. We would have to state this is what we did, and we are now ratifying that action. So it's kind of a public admission of it, and then also notice it so people know what it is that we're doing. So we would just put a general notice as well that consideration and action to approve a contract with X, Y, Z, and then the terms of it. Final considerations, I do this to you all the time. I remind, just as a reminder, do not reply to all in emails. Beware of 4. 4 is the magic number. Beware of the hub and spoke discussions. Don't ask what was the opinion of another member. And when in doubt, use your resources. And these are your resources. The city attorney's office, we're always available to answer any questions that you have with regards to the open meeting law. We'll be providing the quarterly training. We're also providing training to the boards and commissions. There's also the open meeting law booklet. I know you all have those. I think most of you have 2 or 3 because you've been through so much training. And then finally, the Arizona Ombudsman. In closing, before questions, I just want to follow up with you on how we're moving forward in this regard. You have taken previous training. You've taken actually, I think, 9 previous trainings with regard to the Arizona open meeting law, ethics, or conflict of interest training. So I commend you all for that. I know this was difficult to sit through. In terms of our training schedule, September 5th, that's today. We're doing a general overview. December 11th, I'm going to come back to you and talk about specifically electronic communications. At that point in time, prior to that, I'll provide to you a draft copy of a proposed electronic communication policy, and this is per the Attorney General's response, that they would like us to consider to address open meeting law concerns. I'll be presenting that to you prior to that, but that's something that we'll be talking about. That'll be on December 11th. March of 2009, we're going to have a specific discussion about executive sessions, go into greater detail of how they're used, the minutes, how you can go into an e-session, how they're handled. And then finally, in June of 2009, it's an open topic. I'll leave it to you in terms of what we haven't covered. If there is, and I'll be amazed if there is anything that we have not covered, because I think with what we have set out, we will have covered everything. With that, I'm available for any questions that you may have. Otherwise, I thank you all for your attention.
No, any questions? Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Item number 2.
Thank you. This is a presentation and discussion of the City Council's meal reimbursement within the adopted City Council travel policy, requested by Councilmember Alton.
Your floor.
Thank you. Fellow councilmen, I'm bringing this to you on a workshop to hopefully gain your approval on direction to take it forward to an agenda item. And that is, the last time that we had addressed this, we did approve a travel policy. And that travel policy stated that we were just going to use the IRS stated guidelines and no receipts were necessary and to receive that per diem. Well, after doing some checking, I thought that it might be better if we adapted or changed some rules for us and offer you an opportunity to go either way on this, on the amount that you want to get on a per diem. And let me just kind of go through this first. And I don't have anybody to work. Shall I go out there and do my own PowerPoint?
Kathy.
Kathy, do you, I can't operate it from here.
Do you know what the name of your
What's the name of your presentation?
I have no idea. It is reimbursement.
Nope.
Reimbursements options?
Here's the young lady that put it on. Thank you. Is it on here, Stephanie? Stephanie?
I'll go.
No, is it not here?
It's on Notice. Do I have access to Notice or to
Oh, it's, I can go through it. Yeah, you,
The attachment's not here. Yes, you probably.
You can go to the web and pull it up.
It's right here. Will it pull up? Once you're at the regular meeting, you need to go to work session. Back up here.
that's okay.
Pop up.
Why don't we just go ahead and proceed, and if it comes up, it comes up. And I apologize to everyone that this is not available. How we left it is at a daily per diem, and subject to the rates that IRS had given us in their online site, and that is maximum is about $64. There's cities that are such as New Orleans are at 59, Phoenix is at 59, Tucson is 49, and there is a figure for every city or every major city within the United States that we might visit. Having had that, I thought, and that required no receipts. Well, I thought that if we really wanted to go with what the intent was originally, and that was to provide receipts and make us more accountable, we have the capability of just doing a flat $100, which would include any gratuities or anything else for meals. And with that $100, to have the capability of turning in receipts and getting paid back the $100. However, going forward, after doing some research, it was determined that in a trip, say to Washington, D.C., and you thought that, well, maybe I can just do the per diem one day. Say the first day you get there, you're not expected to go out to any major meals or have to pay major money for any specific meal, such as a meeting meal or something. It would be determined that you would use the per diem, and you would get paid in advance of leaving surprise for that with that per diem. However, the next day you see that on your agenda it's going to require a little bit more money for food at dinner because you are attending a meeting and it's at a place that's going to be a little bit more pricey. Well, you can then use the whole day. Each day has to be a certain method. So if you're going to go per diem, you have to do the per diem for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The next day, if you see that you're going to be spending major money for say a dinner, then it's be best to then do the receipts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You cannot mix the per diem or the $100 day in the middle of the day. So you have to plan out a little bit as to how you're going to use and what method you're going to use for the entire day. However, each trip you can go back and forth on methods of allowance, meal allowance. And let me remind you that this is only for meals. If I heard from the mayor that once he arrived in Washington, D.C., I believe it was on Tuesday, he called me and he says, I haven't even left the airport in Washington, D.C., and I'm out of pocket $40 already. Well, that's true, and he was trying to make a point on travel policy. And travel policy is such as that all expenses shall be paid, and that he was being charged for baggage. And so it had nothing to do with meals. So this only has to do with meals. Okay? So that's the change that I make, is that I suggest we make is an or. You can either bring in receipts. If you bring in receipts, you can get $100. If you have a per diem, then it's whatever the per diem is set by IRS guidelines. Okay?
Up to $100 maximum.
No. The IRS guidelines is
No, I mean, bringing in receipts,
$100 max.
max.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay? And that would include gratuity. Okay?
Paid in advance.
And so it would be either or. Now, if you had gotten a per diem every day, and it was $64, say you went to Washington, D.C., if you had gotten a per diem every day, and you came back and you chose to, thank you very much, if you had chosen to do a $100 day, and you had only received 64, then you would come back with all your receipts that went up to exactly $100, or it was $105, but you would only get reimbursed $100. Okay, then the city would pay you the difference between 64 and the 100. Okay, but you have to have the receipts in order to do that. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. So it's an either or, and it can be used in combination for each day. Okay, on your trip. Any questions regarding that?
No.
Okay. And then the other suggestion I make is overnight stays. We were just the majority of us were at the League of Cities convention not too long ago, and it was because of the action that we had passed earlier that none of us were able to stay in Paradise Valley. Not that we all wanted to stay in Paradise Valley, but it was certainly a situation that we could have avoided, because what happens is you go through classes all day and you go through general sessions, and then you're invited out for dinners most of the evenings, and then that's where the networking really takes place. That is where you really do meet one another, and you discuss items that with other cities that develop relationships, and that can be beneficial in the months or years to come to follow. So my suggestion is that overnight for multiple day meetings or conferences are permitted if a meeting or an event starts on or after 7 p.m. on the preceding day, starts or ends, and then starts before 9 o'clock the next day, and the travel time during the busiest period of the commute exceeds an hour. We should not subject anybody to have to come home late, get up really early, and you're not effective the next day. So if at all possible, I would ask that you all consider that going forward, and give it your consideration and give me guidance as to whether or not we should be able to put that on an agenda. Any questions?
Mayor?
Yes.
Richard, I think it's very important that we don't have a specific 90-mile radius issue, because I think, as you just said, a lot of our activities will go into the early evening, and it would be very difficult to get back by the next morning. I cite as an example the newly elected officials sessions that we went to last June, and most of us attended. It was kind of difficult for some of you who chose to drive home every night and come back for those days, where I was able to stay overnight because this had not passed yet, and the city reimbursed me for my evening, because it would have been a very difficult thing to travel back and forth like that. So I absolutely agree with you that with council approval, so we know we're doing it and why we're doing it. I have no problem with that, and I think I would support that change.
Okay.
I have a problem
with that.
Any questions?
Problems, any questions?
Direction?
I don't know about the 7 PM and 7 AM and 9.
I don't think we need to get into that much detail.
Let's just make it council approval, Rich. I mean, you know, you bring it back, if it's within 90 days, and you and John are going to stay overnight, just the rest of us.
Within
know.
90 days, within 90 miles?
Yeah.
With you?
Well, it's
90
yeah,
miles.
90-mile circle or radius.
I like the idea. I think that, you know, that by defining it, you're letting folks know that there's a late night, there's business to be done, and then the next morning, early morning, there's more business to be done. And I think it would be appropriate. I like the idea.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, or Councilman Johnson?
What, so you're saying do away with the 90-mile radius, right? Is that what you're saying?
No.
If in fact, the meeting lasts until late in the evening, and you're expected to be back at, before 9 o'clock the next morning, the 90 days goes away. Or the
90
90
miles.
miles goes away.
Yes, Randy?
Let me make one suggestion and observation. One of the things that we've tried to do with this is that the Internal Revenue has some requirements, and if there was a, if there was a meeting that you were attending in Buckeye and you stayed overnight, the Internal Revenue wouldn't look favorably on that even if you approved it. So what we've tried to do in crafting the language that Councilmember Alton read, where we said overnight stays for multi-day meetings or conferences are permitted if the event starts after 7 o'clock. So if you have a dinner meeting or a meeting in the evening one day, and then the next morning it starts before 9 o'clock, then you would be able to stay overnight, and if the commute would be more than an hour. So, there are times that it could be in downtown Phoenix, based on commuting time and things like that, it would make it very difficult. So what we've tried to do is to craft a method that complies with the Internal Revenue Service, even though, I don't believe that you would approve something, such as Glendale. The IRS likes policies that have some parameters in them.
Okay.
Good point.
Any further questions?
Well, if you look at it, though, an hour drive could be subjective to how the traffic is.
That's why we
so-
said during the busiest time of the commute. In other words, if you were going in for a meeting that was going to start at 9 o'clock in the morning,
Okay.
and it was at Paradise Valley, you're going to hit some traffic. If you did it, you're right, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
Right.
it probably is not. That's why we said busiest period.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can just get a limo service, and you can pay for that. No.
I will then take this, your responses as direction to bring it back on the agenda.
Okay, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. Well, this meeting's come to an end, and we'll readjourn at 6 o'clock.